I'm Sven Soderblom. I'm with a fund-of-fund business called Arcano. I'm based in Spain and I'm investing in the US, Europe and in Latin America and Africa in private equity funds. And I'm here with Simon Harford, who's with Actis, one of the longest standing private equity firms throughout Africa, and someone who will give great insight on the private equity industry there. May I also shoot off with the first question, that is, there's a lot of interest and growing interest by international investors in Africa wanting to expand into the region via private equity, but there's also a lot of uncertainty on how to do it, and people are worried about kind of the lack of maturity of the market, sophistication of the market. And one of the issues that often come up is the issues of talent and education in Africa and the operating environment of actually being on the ground investing in businesses. I wanted to ask you, being one of the most experienced fund managers, how do you view that challenge, the operating environment and the issue of finding talent for portfolio companies?
Sven, I agree. The interest is growing in Africa of both investors and GPs. But you're right, it remains difficult. The how to do it is still challenging. On the management side, I think for us as an investor in big companies, our investment is at $50 million up. It's got a little bit easier, but it's still hard. It's got a little bit easier because over the last 2 or 3 years, the international job market has become harder. And so I think a lot of management talent is more attracted to emerging markets and even Africa in a way they might not have been when the developed markets were booming. The role of private equity, the credibility of private equity as a shareholder, I think is growing. And so caliber management like the idea of the autonomy of a private equity business, the ability to create wealth themselves, and obviously diaspora are also returning home. So we are finding that it's still hard, you're right, and it's arguably one of our biggest challenges to not just find the CEO, but the team around him or her, CFO, HR, commercial skills. It is still a challenge, and we put a huge amount of effort into it, but it is getting perhaps a little bit easier than it was 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
The other thing we're doing is we don't just find the management and leave them to it. We have our own operational support team. We call it our value creation group. In US language, it would be the operating partners. And globally, not just Africa, we are building that team up because we believe that all management teams need support, even the biggest and best. And so we've got an in-house group of former business people, former operators, former consultants who work with the management post-investment. And we're seeing a very direct return on that. Management teams like it a lot, and we see a direct return into the performance of the business.
Yeah. Now that's the model of operating partners sounds like a very good model for not only Africa but emerging markets generally, and an important way of. Another area of uncertainty or awareness of international investors is the whole area around ESG, environmental, social and governance risk, which is people just sense or feel that, particularly those that are not very close to Africa, are issues around bribery, corruption, accounting practices, transparency generally. That's a question by people like us to all fund managers. How do you manage ESG? How do you deal with it? And everyone claims to have, proper management system and all that. But maybe you could comment something. I know Actis have, with its background in CDC, has a very long history and tradition within the ESG management. But in practice, can you comment a little bit how you manage ESG?
Sure, it's a huge issue for us. I mean, as you're right, Actis has always taken ESG extremely seriously. And often we've led the approach on this. So yes, our investors and the LPs are wanting us to take it seriously, but in terms of thought leadership and, again, how to do it in practice. So the theory is a bit easier than the practice sometimes. So we continue to take it very seriously. We've got an in-house 3-person ESG team, which we call responsible investment. So they've got specific skills in environmental practices, in social practices. So we put our money where our mouth is. We have in-house overhead in terms of headcount to deliver ESG results. What we're trying to do now is move it from historically what it's been, a little bit of a risk management, sort of protecting your downside, to a degree compliance approach, which is important and it's necessary, but we don't think it's sufficient. We're maintaining that approach, but we're now trying to move it more into a value creation mentality, where we work much more closely with our portfolio companies around not just a risk management attitude to ESG, but an entire sustainability attitude for all their ecosystem of suppliers, their supply chain, their staff, their customers, their community, the entire ecosystem around a portfolio company, to work with the management teams to get them to think about a sustainability agenda for that, so that they are not just thinking of it as CSR, let's donate some money to a good cause, which is still quite widespread as the thought in less developed markets, but to think of it much more as how do they create links with their ecosystem that directly create value in their business. So for example, a supply chain that is sustainable, local producers, you're creating jobs, you're closer to the market, as opposed to importing inputs from overseas. Or for example, with workforce relations, one of our companies in South Africa has for many, many years operated and funded a school for their workforce, for the kids of their workforce. But this is not just providing money, it's sort of fully integrated into who they hire and how they manage the relationship with their workforce. And it yields results in terms of workforce stability, in terms of wage negotiations in South Africa, which is a relatively difficult climate for that. They have got excellent workforce relations. So we're now pushing much more around a holistic attitude to all the ways that our portfolio company interacts with society, and to look at it as value creation.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, it's not only risk mitigation, it's actually often part of the investment case and the investment opportunity in the companies, which is good.
And interestingly, if I may add, with exits, some of this does cost money, obviously, and you've got to make the case for it. But in exits, the vast majority of our exits are to strategic buyers, many of whom are multinationals, European or US, and they absolutely value this. And so we are seeing a direct impact in our exit multiples and the enthusiasm of multinational strategic buyers because of the work we're doing on this. So this is, morally it's important and we believe in it morally, but this has an absolutely hard business objective as well.
That is what gives me comfort often. If you're driven by carry, and carry you get from good exits, and important part of the exits sell to multinationals, and you need a clean ESG record to be able to sell to multinationals, and that's what gives me a big degree of comfort.
Exactly.
A final question maybe would be around the environment, investment environment in Africa amongst private equity firms. There's more and more interest for Africa, not yet translating into big flows of capital, but probably soon it will, once there are more visible exits and so forth, such as, like similar to what has happened in Latin America. And Actis is one of the most experienced funds, with the longest track record. It has also grown and become raising bigger and bigger funds, investing in bigger deals. And one concern for an investor like me coming into Africa is, if you invest in one of the more experienced fund managers like Actis, you will end up perhaps in bigger deals and bigger funds. Maybe you could say a word about how you view the competition. Is there enough deal flow in this space, particularly if other big funds, there are a number of bigger initiatives out there trying to raise bigger funds, and how much space, how many Actis is there space for in Africa?
Yeah, it's a great question. In general, we are very positive about the growth of private equity in Africa. And if you look at, you could take your question and apply it to the mid-market in the UK for private equity, or you could apply it to the US For many, many years, observers have questioned whether there's room in those mature markets for more private equity players. And of course, Africa is, with the exception of South Africa, the least mature market. So if you look at the penetration of private equity as a percentage of GDP, for example, one metric of market maturity, it is still extremely low, including compared to Latin America, China, India. So my view is that there's ample opportunity for funds of all sizes. The market is, the underlying economies are growing, so they're becoming more big companies, which can accommodate the capital that Actis and similar have. I think also the share of the market is going to grow because, and this is a personal belief as well, I think private equity is a very good model for Africa in terms of capital and governance, because it is an active owner. And the points you were raising before, Sven, about it's the way you do business and the way you impact on the society. It's not just about making money, and that is fundamental to our belief. And because private equity it's an active owner, it's a focused owner, it's an involved owner, we, like any private equity firm, we have a very intense focus on performance and the way things are done. Ethics, the ESG, the sustainability topic I was talking about. And I think that is actually a very powerful way to create benefits for Africa beyond private equity. So if you look at the share of private equity relative to other forms of capital, and what's also good for Africa, I actually think the share should go up because it has spin-off benefits well beyond the company and the PE fund.